Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. We are Wipalas across the world, and we are about to start our panel about solidarity, international solidarity. Wipalas across the world and all its members and collective welcome you to these 2 weeks of international solidarity, international campaign, 14 Days of Resistance, where we demand justice for the victims of the coup d'etat in Bolivia and demand a stop to international interference in Bolivia and the Latin American region. In Bolivia, there was a coup d'etat in November 2019 that imposed the dictatorial and intensely racist regime of Mrs. Janine Áñez, which in 11 months left 37 dead, more than 1,000 injured, and over 1,500 politically persecuted. Among them, former President Evo Morales and all of his ministers. Our international campaign opened with the launch of the replica of the mural of the victims of the coup here in the city of London, and is available until the 4th of July here in Shoreditch, East London. We want to publicly thank Oli Studios, Uncle, for their artistical and technical support in making this mural, this replica of this mural happen here in London. During these 14 days of resistance, panels like these ones today are held to expose and denounce the consequences of the imperialistic interference in our nations, in Latin America and the Abya Yala. We, at the end of our campaign, on the Saturday, 3rd of July, we're going to have the premiere of the documentary Fue Golpe, which translates to Es Golpe, Fue Golpe, with English subtitles to all Europe and international audience. We will share the link where you can sign and register to get access and watch the premiere. This premiere is a joint effort with Progressive International and will be live on all our platforms. Today, our panel is international solidarity. Like Bolivia, the rest of Latin America is subjected to foreign interference and foreign aggression against its national sovereignty by the United States, in complicity with its European allies and Latin American elites, a reality that our continent suffers as a consequence of the infamous Monroe Doctrine. These attacks are expressed in coups, economic blockade, terrorist acts, threat of military invasion, financing domestic subversion, and training and deployment of paramilitaries, terrorist acts, and concerted media. The demonization of both government and progressive forces in the region. It is not possible for us today but to cover some of the countries that suffered the imperialist aggression. For them, we will have speakers from the situation of Cuba, Venezuela, Colombia, Nicaragua, and of course, Bolivia. Thank you very much for your time and for joining us today. We're going to start today with our comrade, Marta, who joins us from Canada, representing Colombia Humana. Marta, bienvenida a Wipalas por el Mundo.
Muy buenas tardes. Muy buenas tardes para todos. Me encuentro,
ahora,
me encuentro
Marta,
en la ciudad de Montreal. ¿Sí me escuchan?
Sí, antes de comenzar voy a explicar en español para nuestra audiencia que habla español, cómo poder escuchar, a nuestra audiencia que habla inglés, cómo escuchar lo que usted nos va a hablar hoy en el idioma inglés, okay? So everyone that speaks English now, this is the only section we're going to do in Spanish. So if you speak English and you need translation into Spanish, please go to the panel, to your screen at the bottom. It says interpretation, and select translation or interpretation to Spanish. We want to say thank you to Pedro, who's working really hard in the interpretation all the way from Bolivia. Gracias, Pedro. Are you okay now with the interpretation? Have you? Okay, perfect. Compañera Marta, la escuchamos. Bienvenida. Marta, la escuchamos. Sí, tiene 8 a 10 minutos. Sí, la escuchamos.
Muy buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Yo les hablo desde la ciudad de Montreal, en la provincia de Quebec. Lamento que no hable el inglés de manera fluida como ustedes, porque yo hablo francés aquí en esta provincia. Hago parte de la Colombia Humana, un movimiento político que surge de la rabia que nos invade ante la corrupción y digamos, el asesinato selectivo que ha venido realizándose en Colombia desde hace más de 16 años. Con la firma de los acuerdos de paz se ha ido todo deteriorando. La ultraderecha se ha posicionado, son gente digamos, de mala propicia, como decimos en Colombia, es gente narcotraficante, son criminales y además están muy sometidos a los Estados Unidos, razón por la cual a pesar de las denuncias que hemos hecho ante la Corte Penal Internacional y ante la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, en Colombia no pasa nada. El 28 de abril de este año reventó como una olla de presión la inconformidad y el descontento del pueblo colombiano, que venía siendo encerrado durante la pandemia, viviendo una miseria, ya que allí no tenemos una renta básica que permita a las personas más humildes sobrevivir, y sin vacunas la pandemia ha sido arrasadora, ha ido acabando. Más de 700 colombianos se mueren por día. En realidad yo pienso que la solidaridad es muy importante. Yo saludo gratamente este colectivo, a la compañera Claudia y a Maya y a todo el grupo de Huipala, a todos los que están aquí presentes. No los conozco, pero los abrazo de manera cordial y revolucionaria, porque sé que son personas que están interesadas en la solidaridad internacional con todos los pueblos del mundo que sufren la represión y el abuso. Nosotros desde Canadá, nosotros tenemos un colectivo que se llama Acción y Solidarité por la Colombie, por eso aparece ASOCOL, que existe desde hace más de 30 años. Yo misma, en el año 82, fui desaparecida, era docente, era miembro de la Federación Colombiana de Educadores y fui llevada a las caballerizas del ejército colombiano. Sufrí el abuso de todo tipo, fui torturada y luego de allí salimos por la intervención de Amnistía Internacional, que nos trajo aquí al Canadá, justamente por la solidaridad de docentes canadienses que nos colaboraron, y algunos grupos de allá de solidaridad en Colombia, como fue la Iglesia Menonita y un abogado que fue asesinado después, Eduardo Umaña Mendoza. Nosotros hemos estado organizando actividades cada semana desde el 28 de abril. Y es de suma importancia que nosotros, como latinoamericanos, como ciudadanos del mundo, independientemente de la latitud donde nos encontremos, estemos atentos a lo que está pasando en Colombia y en todos los países, como Brasil también, Bolivia, evidentemente todo lo que sufrió. En este momento pues estamos a la moda, en primer renglón en el mundo, ya que han sido asesinados más de 360 jóvenes que han estado participando en el paro, pidiendo simplemente una educación, una vivienda, un trabajo digno y el derecho a la vida, fundamentalmente el respeto a la vida. Han sido también privados de la vista de un ojo más de 36 jóvenes, han sido violadas por la policía colombiana, 44 mujeres, y se han creado varios grupos de resistencia en diferentes puntos en Colombia, entre otros en la ciudad de Cali, en Bogotá, en Medellín, en Bucaramanga, que son los puntos centrales donde se mantiene hasta hoy día, porque el paro no para y la calle no se calla, compañeros. Es un movimiento que está ahí el día a día. Ha habido casos de mucho coraje de mujeres, que una de ellas que le asesinaron su hijo en la primera línea, que es donde se posicionan los jóvenes que están enfrentando a esos hombres que andan armados hasta los dientes, y los jóvenes simplemente, nosotros les hemos mandado gafas para cubrir sus ojos y cascos, y han hecho chalecos con canecas de la basura en metal para ponerse al frente de hombres que están armados hasta los dientes, que han estado casi que disparando en helicópteros a las casas de las personas, allanando residencias, tomando más de 1,000 personas que andan desaparecidos. En Colombia en este momento ya pasó la cifra, el gobierno reconoce 546, pero van más de 1000 personas desaparecidas. Y la desaparición constituye un crimen de lesa humanidad que va más allá del mismo asesinato, porque el desaparecer a un ser querido genera en una familia, en una pareja, en una relación padre-hijo, un desconcierto y una herida fatal que no se cierra nunca, porque esperar a alguien sin que llegue, pensando lo que le pueden estar haciendo, lo que le pueden estar eh, acribillando, torturando, es algo que yo creo que hasta una madre en el lecho de muerte sufre terriblemente de no ver a su hijo al momento de partir de este mundo. Es un crimen que deplorable y bueno, nosotros necesitamos grandemente de la solidaridad de todos los pueblos del mundo, porque si ha caído la reforma tributaria, que fue el inicio de este movimiento, y la reforma a la salud, ha sido por la presencia también de la comunidad internacional en lo que constituye la denuncia. Es muy importante que denunciemos y que nos acompañemos hombro a hombro en los documentos que hagamos llegar a los diferentes gobiernos donde nosotros vivimos. Aquí nosotros hemos ido al Parlamento canadiense, llevamos una lista que hicimos en una tela blanca con letras rojas de la cantidad de líderes sociales que han sido asesinados y de los jóvenes que fueron ultimados también a bala por la policía colombiana desde el 28 de abril. Considero de gran importancia este movimiento y yo les pido y les agradezco este espacio que me han dado para mencionar lo que está sucediendo en Colombia y también para manifestar nuestra voluntad sincera y solidaria ante cualquier hecho que esté pasando en cualquier país de América Latina y del mundo entero. Lo único que nos queda, digamos, en la solidaridad internacional es la denuncia. Y yo les pido que no bajemos la guardia, que nos mantengamos juntos para poder hacer una influencia, para influenciar grandemente en lo que pueda suceder en América Latina. Digamos, la CIA y los grupos que están detrás, las grandes compañías mineras que andan rompiendo a cielo abierto y que andan demandando a nuestros países por cifras desgraciadas, inconcebibles, por miles de millones de dólares. Una compañía canadiense demandó a Colombia porque no le dejó sacar el oro que iban a sacar a cielo abierto. Entonces, yo pienso que nosotros debemos mantenernos al tanto y no bajar la guardia. Yo les doy una gratitud muy grande por este espacio, por su voluntad de ser solidarios y manifiesto también esa misma voluntad para trabajar con ustedes, con los compañeros de Bolivia, de Nicaragua, de Venezuela, que han pretendido invadirla también y han tratado de desdibujar la imagen, digamos, de la revolución bolivariana, diciendo pues prácticamente que son castrochavistas y calumniando a cualquier ciudadano que muestre un punto de vista diferente y que conteste estas medidas criminales y agresivas contra los países que llaman ellos del tercer mundo. Un saludo cordial para la embajadora de Nicaragua y para todos ustedes, compañeros, desde Canadá, un gran abrazo solidario y fraterno. No
Gracias
sé si
a,
tiempo, el tiempo.
gracias a usted. No, gracias a usted. Y sí, sin duda, nuestro movimiento es internacionalista. Estamos como hermanos latinoamericanos, como hermanos de la Via Yala, unidos en esa voz donde decimos no más interferencia, injerencia en nuestros países soberanos, nuestras naciones soberanas. Gracias, Marta, por tomarse el tiempo, por ser parte de este movimiento y por la labor que usted está realizando desde Canadá y con todos sus colectivos. Gracias, Marta, y nos veremos. ¿Quiere decir algo más? Perdón.
Olvidé decir que hago parte también de un grupo de mujeres internacional, que es el colectivo Feministas y Plebeyas, que hace parte de la Colombia Humana. Todos somos de la Colombia Humana. Un abrazo.
Sin duda,
Quedo
sin
atenta.
duda más esfuerzo, sí.
quedo atenta, compañeros y compañeras.
Perfecto, Marta. Habrán preguntas y respuestas para el final. Ahora vamos a cruzar al inglés y vamos luego a volver al final a una ronda de preguntas. Gracias, Marta, y bienvenida nuevamente.
Un abrazo.
Ok, vamos ahora a seguir con nuestra sesión. Esta vez ya nos cruzamos al inglés. Entonces, le pedimos a todos quienes están escuchando que hablan español y que necesiten interpretación, que por favor cambien la interpretación al inglés. El resto de nuestro panel será ahora en inglés. Esto es la diversidad de nuestros paneles, la diversidad de nuestras naciones. Thank you. We're now going to move on to English for everyone that is, I've just given this, the message in Spanish to rotate for the interpretation. Right, so next we are going to hear from Progressive International, from Matt. Matt is the first time for Matt here in Wipalas across the world. It's been an absolute pleasure working together with Wipalas across the world and all of the efforts that have been joined to support the recovery and restoration of democracy in Bolivia. Progressive International has led important campaigns in the Latin American region and continue to do so, challenging anti-imperialistic and anti-colonial practices. Matt, welcome to Wipalas Across the World, this time as a panelist.
Thanks so much, Claudia. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all, the other panelists as well. It's an honor to share the stage with you today. My name is Matt Kierkegaard. I represent the Progressive International. I'm a coordinator there. And the Progressive International essentially is an organization formed to unite left-wing and progressive forces around the world, not only to unite them, but also to mobilize and organize towards actual coordinated action. Really what the mission we hold in our heads every day is to think about solidarity as more than a slogan, it's more than a tweet, it's more than a forum, but in what ways can we make it material and real and bring that into the world? So we've done this in a number of ways. We've organized international labor organizing across the supply chain of Amazon, the mega corporation led by the richest man on earth, Jeff Bezos. Most recently, we've had the pleasure to organize a vaccine summit, actually, trying to end the pandemic from the global south, including dear comrades like Rogelio Maita, the foreign minister of Bolivia, and many other leaders from across the region. But I want to talk today about three specific cases of our electoral observation work that really began thanks to Bolivia, thanks to Claudia, thanks to our comrades in the MAS. Exploring electoral observation in this climate of imperialism and of lawfare as a tangible intervention to demonstrate real solidarity. And I think it's important to note, in the Bolivian case, of course, the election was absolutely vital, but even before the election, it was really average Bolivians in unions and peasant organizations putting their bodies on the line to guarantee an actual election, on blockades, in strikes from around the world. The solidarity that Wipalas across the world has shown. I mean, this was really, in the middle part of October 20, or the middle part of 2020, so critical leading up to the election in October. And really, this is where we began. We didn't, we at Progressive International on the Secretariat, hadn't considered observing elections. This is not a skill set we had. It was nothing we had ever done before. But in the middle of the pandemic, I think, which only made it more critical, we dispatched a delegation to La Paz, containing parliamentarians from Greece, from Poland, from across Latin America as well. And this was, I think, such a vital moment because although a coup, it wasn't in our sort of in our capacity to stop a coup by any means, I think it was able to close certain avenues, certain doors to the most extreme forms of violence, like we saw in 2019, and it was allowed the free expression of the Bolivian people and their will in the re-election of the MAS, and of course the restoration of democracy. And this is a process we've been continuing to follow with Wipalas. But it was really a learning experience for us at PI. And this, the second election that we observed was in Ecuador the next year, and this year in 2021, in early 2021. And once again we saw the playbook come out, I think, of the Bolivian case, an allegation of false fraud, confusion not only of course in the Ecuadorian case, but confusion at the international scale. And I'm speaking about, of course, Yaku Perez, claiming fraud with the OAS sitting at the table, negotiating an agreement completely outside of the bounds of any sort of norms of Ecuadorian law. And that this was also a process that began months and months before the election. It was only by extreme international vigilance that progressive forces, and very specifically Andrés Arauz and Carlos Rabascal, were able to even contest the election. It was a 3-2 vote on the National Electoral Council, and it very easily could have gone the other way without even the opportunity to contest these elections. So the following these contests for much more than the usual 1 week or maybe 2 weeks that they're given in the international press, I think is absolutely vital for international solidarity. But also, I think we learned the importance there of media observation and the importance of fighting for truth and integrity in the media and in the broader discourse, right? Not only in the national media, but as well as in the international sphere. I mean, in Spanish and English and many other languages as well. But this was, false allegations were able to proliferate at a really an astounding speed and disorienting effect due to, I think, very clear media interference. And we tried to add something novel here by actually adding a technical backstop. We brought technical data analysts and electoral experts and legal experts and data scientists to be able to very clearly demonstrate once again that there was no fraud, just similar to the Bolivian case, and that such allegations were completely fabricated. But of course, in the end, progressive forces lost, in part due to political division in Ecuador. But we brought this experience moving forward again to Peru most recently, and I think this is a much more hopeful and inspiring case, with even revealing even more tactics of lawfare against the left, against progressive forces. At the first instance, now for the first time we were denied accreditation as international observers on the ridiculous, I think, pretense that we should have applied for accreditation months and months and months before. It was clearly a political decision, and it didn't affect only us, it affected other delegations as well. It affected the Andean Parliament, made up primarily of representatives from the MAS, weren't able to come as official elections observers there. But nevertheless, even just in these very challenging conditions, victory for popular sovereignty was still proven possible, even in the most trying circumstances, in the closest election possible. And in an instance where if you were external forces wanting to shift the final outcome of this election, it would have been the most easy possible time to do so. As we know, the end result is about 40,000 votes, and not even a half a percentage point, maybe not even a quarter of a percentage point. And but nonetheless, I think our observation, the observation and the vigilance of the rest of the world, I think, was able to fend off some of the most blatant coup mongering that was certainly underway in Peru. Now, we're not out of the woods yet, because I think the latest strategy that is, of course, emerging now is just delay and delegitimization. Of course, we're still seeing the false fraud accusations brought forward by Keiko Fujimori. These are so far been struck down by the courts of public opinion. But even if they don't succeed, it belies a broader strategy of destroying a popular mandate through sowing doubt, delaying the events as long as possible, and ultimately delegitimizing what is a clear democratic victory for popular forces, really in a long time in Peru. So this is what we're seeing now, and I want to just close here, not to go on too long, but to say that, you know, this is something that we see, of course, in the contest coming up in Colombia, in Brazil, in Chile, where, you know, we must be vigilant of this lawfare against popular movements, against the attempts to decapitate them by, you know, removing top candidates, by removing top leaders, by fabricating accusations against them, or by, you know, write-ups, you know, as in stealing it on election day. This is something that we have to keep following through and remain vigilant of, even months before and after the process. And so I just want to close by saying that, you know, solidarity has often been described as, you know, the tenderness among peoples. I think that's true, but also it has to be our tenacity as well. We can't give up on one another. We can't forget, and it has to be in the long haul that these struggles are fought and won. And I just want to thank everyone again today. That's all from me, but it's a real pleasure to share the stage with y'all today.
Thank you so much, Matt. Very important intervention because for us that have been in the movement, that have been trying to get information on what's happening on the ground, you guys have been really key in challenging those mainstream media silence and also showing what's happening on the ground. And I believe you're quickly becoming that very important role of electoral observation in the region. So as a Boliviana, that saw your absolute efforts and so as well some treatment that you received, and despite that you continue, I want to say thank you for all your support. And we continue to look forward to working together and challenging the empire in the best possible way we can.
So much of it is thanks to you, Claudia. So thank you.
We're fantastic. Thank you so much, Matt. There will be questions and answers at the end. Anyone that didn't know about Progressive International, though I'm sure that a lot of us now know about their work, follow them up on their social media. We're going to be also sharing the links in here. We're now next moving on to speaking with Francisco Dominguez, who will be talking to us about Venezuela. Before his forcing intervention, we're going to show this little video clip as an introduction to him talking to us about the situation in Venezuela.
Bienvenido, bienvenida a este avance de último minuto. La relatora especial de Naciones Unidas sobre medidas coercitivas unilaterales y derechos humanos, Elena Duhan, finaliza su visita de más de 10 días a Venezuela para evaluar el impacto de las medidas coercitivas unilaterales impuestas por Estados Unidos al pueblo de esta nación suramericana. Es así como, tras evaluaciones in situ, la relatora ofrece sus observaciones y hallazgos preliminares en la conferencia de prensa que vamos a escuchar a continuación.
Se doctoró en la Universidad Estatal de Bielorrusia en 2005 y obtuvo el doctorado en Derecho Internacional y Derecho Europeo en 2015 en Bielorrusia. Los intereses académicos y de investigación de la señora Duhan se centran en los campos del derecho internacional, las sanciones y los derechos humanos, el derecho de la seguridad internacional, el derecho de las organizaciones internacionales, la solución de controversias internacionales y el derecho medioambiental internacional. Los relatores especiales forman parte de lo que se conoce como procedimientos especiales del Consejo de Derechos Humanos. Los procedimientos especiales, el mayor órgano de expertos independientes del sistema de derechos humanos de la ONU, es el nombre general de los mecanismos independientes de investigación y supervisión del Consejo que se ocupan de situaciones específicas de países o de cuestiones temáticas en todo el mundo. Los expertos de los procedimientos especiales trabajan de forma voluntaria, no son personal de la ONU y no reciben un salario por su trabajo. Son independientes de cualquier gobierno u organización y prestan sus servicios a título individual. Sin más, vamos a dar la palabra a la relatora especial.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here and to present my preliminary observations of the visit to
Observaciones preliminares de la visita a Venezuela de la relatora especial de las Naciones Unidas sobre el impacto negativo de las medidas coercitivas unilaterales reunión que tuvo lugar desde el 1 al 12 de febrero. Quiero agradecer al gobierno de Venezuela por invitarme. El propósito de la visita fue evaluar el impacto de las medidas coercitivas unilaterales por los pueblos afectados y los que viven en Venezuela. Las observaciones son preliminares, el resultado de las consultas exhaustivas con una amplia gama de interlocutores. El informe, durante la visita me reuní con el presidente y la vicepresidenta de la República y con los ministros de Relaciones Exteriores, Vivienda, la economía, petróleo, minas, alimentación, equidad de género, vivienda, ciencias, tecnología, transporte, cultura, y el coordinador de la producción, el secretario general del Comité de Relaciones, el presidente de PDVSA y del Banco Central.
Bienvenido, Francisco. Esta era una pequeña introducción. That was a quick introduction to what you're going to bring today and talk about the situation in Venezuela. Bienvenido, Francisco. We're going to share the link for anyone that wants to see the complete video.
Yeah, thanks very much. This was Elena Duhan, Special Rapporteur of the United Nations, who visited Venezuela for about 12 days back in February, where she saw exactly what was going on in terms of the very, very, very negative impact of the US sanctions, which are unilateral coercive measures, in the technical jargon, on the people of Venezuela. The number of reports that have been produced already by independent bodies, such as the Center for Economic and Policy Research and a few others, indicate the scale of the damage that the sanctions are doing on the people of Venezuela. Venezuela is totally blockaded, perhaps even more than Cuba, if that is possible. It is not possible for Venezuela to conduct any financial transaction anywhere in the world, certainly anywhere in the world where the United States has any influence. So Venezuela finds itself in the position of requesting services, including medical services for people who are very ill, from specialized clinics around the world. Venezuela is asked to pay for this treatment before the treatment is actually performed. Venezuela deposits the money and pays for the treatment to a bank, that then the bank not only refuses to pay the monies to the clinic to perform the treatment, but worse than that, the bank, in case, retains the money. And it's still today the case. And the key reason, I don't want to defend the banks, don't get me wrong, but the main reason why the banks are doing this is not so much because they would like to keep the money, which I'm sure they would like to, but the main reason is because they're shit scared of the United States applying sanctions against them, retaliation of every kind. In the case of Cuba, we know that many banks and many financial institutions and many institutions of various kinds have been sanctioned by the United States with billions of dollars of sanctions, which these banks have paid, religiously. This is a disgrace. So the United States is desperate to try to asphyxiate this economy by killing the people. And the reason why it wants to kill the people is because it wants to drive the people into despair, which if I were to be facing that situation myself, I would be in despair. And the intention behind this is a very sinister one, is to drive people into despair so that they explode socially to cause confrontations domestically so that there is internal turmoil, so that the United States can go to the Organization of American States, the European Union, God knows what else, and justify an intervention which would be military and conducted by the United States under some guise, as they have done it many times before. The main reason why the United States wants to do this is because Venezuela in Latin America represents the jewel in the crown. Venezuela has so much assets, which is unbelievable. I mean, Cuba is being punished for being, a good example. But Cuba is poor in resources, apart from sugar and, wonderful people and wonderful music. The United States just hates Cuba because Cuba's challenged it. There is no other reason, really. Whereas in Venezuela, there is something much more substantial at stake. Venezuela has the largest deposit of oil in the world. The United States is running out of its own oil. Venezuela has one of the largest deposits of gold in the world. The United States dollar is declining quite dramatically. And any minister of economics, even in the United States, will be able to prop up the dollar, not only domestically, but also internationally, if they were able to lay their hands on this huge amount of gold in Venezuela. Plus, Venezuela has rare minerals. So this is the reason. This is what is driving it. And the United States have run out of options. It's tried absolutely everything imaginable. And what is extraordinary, and I take my hat off for the Venezuelan people, have tried absolutely everything and yet has been unable to get their way. People and the government continue to resist, and they're not doing too badly, even though the situation is no good. So much so that the central issue that Venezuela faces today is the enormous generosity, political generosity, which comes from the ethics of the government and of the process in Venezuela, which is to do everything possible to include the opposition in a dialogue and in the elections. That is to say, do everything possible to expand democracy, even giving them chances to the opposition to participate in the election. I think it must be the only country in the world, the only government in the world that is desperately trying to persuade the opposition to participate in the elections and to vote against the government. I do not know any other government in the world that actually does this. Only President Maduro. I think Chavez did something like that. So on the 21st of November, there will be elections in Venezuela. And this time round, the elections are taking place and the situation keeps improving from the political point of view, in the sense that substantial sections of the opposition are already participating in the elections, register their candidates, and they are participating, canvassing, campaigning, and so on, as they should do in a democracy. And even Juan Guaido is desperately asking Maduro to participate to be allowed to participate in the elections. And President Maduro made it totally clear that yes, he could. There is no reason, no problem, except that there are three preconditions. One is that he demands that sanctions are lifted against the government because Juan Guaido demanded them. So he claims that he was the one who actually brought that on. So therefore Maduro is asking him to actually rescind that, get rid of them if he can. Number two, he wants all the assets that have been confiscated by the United States and around the world, which is plenty of them. We're talking about quantities in the region of 44 to 45 billion. And if you include the losses that Venezuela has incurred as a result of these confiscations, we are talking about possibly 120 billion, which is a huge amount of resources. So that's the second thing Maduro is demanding from Guaido. And the third one is that Guaido recognizes the National Assembly, which was elected back in December and entered into action in January this year. And Guaido says he still wants to, and so on. So the position is really that the sanctions have miserably failed. And the only option open to the United States is some sort of military action, which I doubt they want to do, because otherwise, despite the noises that they make and so on, I doubt very much. Nevertheless, we should be very, very vigilant. Now, what is going on is this, and I want to finish with some positive notes, even though vigilant sort of positivism. The number of countries that recognize, the number of governments in the world that recognize Guaidó has declined quite dramatically. They used to say in the media, not to name any guardians, of course, they used to say that it was 50 governments that recognized Guaidó. The European Union dropped the recognition of Juan Guaidó. That is gone. Mexico has gone. Argentina has gone. Bolivia is gone. And there are a few other changes like that. And I think the only two governments which militantly recognize Juan Guaidó are the United States and the United Kingdom. That's as far as I'm aware. They are militantly part of it. So what we want to do is to campaign in the UK for the government of Boris Johnson to stop recognizing these clan, which is that cause so much damage to its own population. The second thing we want to do is to isolate the United States so that the United States respects the will of the Venezuelan people in the coming election, which the United States refused to recognize in 26 elections which have taken place in Venezuela since 1999. The third thing we want to demand is that all the gold which is held, retained illegally in the Bank of England is returned without any conditions and immediately. So unconditionally and immediately is returned. These monies are requested by the Venezuelan state and the Venezuelan people so that they can use these resources to buy health inputs, vaccines, medicines, and food in order to save lives in Venezuela because the situation is so difficult. And we want also that all the assets that are being confiscated by the United States, but also by the European financial institutions, not only the Banco Novo of Portugal, but also Euroclear in Europe, that they return these monies that belong to Venezuela, which are in the tune of something like $7 billion, $7,000 million, which is a substantial amount. The worst part of this, which makes me sick, is that the media say Maduro is guilty of the way he's treating his people when actually it's got nothing to do with it. And then finalize with this, which is a bit of sloganish, but I think is correct. Resistance pays off. So we are doing that very well. Thank you very much to everyone.
Bravo. Thank you, Francisco. And it's precisely the reason why we hold these 14 days of resistance. Resistance pays off. And what an important detail you just given us there about Britain is still recognizing Guaidó and the role that Britain and Europe plays in our nations in the Latin American region. This is precisely why we are hosting these 14 days of resistance, because we want to bring to the public the understanding and education as well about the impact of interference in our nations. Britain playing a role in the coup d'etat in Bolivia, and as we just heard from Francisco, also some of the interference in places like Venezuela. Thank you, Francisco. Francisco will return as panelist in a little bit later to talk to us about the situation in Nicaragua. Now we're going to continue with Aaron Kelly, who we are very pleased to have you here today. Aaron, thank you for making the time and the space for joining us today. Aaron, the floor is yours, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Muchas gracias. And thank you so much for organizing this really important and really necessary event. And just to echo what Francisco has just said and what you've just said, and indeed others have mentioned, that importance of resistance. I think it's important for the rest of the world, those of us out with the Americas, to recognize the levels of organization and political consciousness, crucially anti-imperialism in particular, as a facet of that political consciousness, and also indeed your resilience, what you've had to put up with. You are light years ahead of the rest of us, and often these conversations are the wrong way round. You know, you have metropolitan people handing out lessons about democracy and values and so on. There's actually a lot of learning needs to go on around the world to learn directly from those of you in the Americas. As has been mentioned, the Americas is really the front line in the struggle against imperialism and neoliberalism. The Monroe Doctrine that was trialed across your continent and then exported as part of this pathological drive towards unipolar domination of an entire planet is being played out across the Americas. And where we are at the moment, as we've heard in relation to Colombia, we could also mention the fully militarized response to relatively modest street protests in Chile, for example. That era, or that sort of post-Soviet era of the end of history and a nice kind of friendly, benign, market-driven capitalism that's going to save us all and everybody's included and everybody's a stakeholder. There, for a time, there was a bit of traction to that narrative, to that myth, and it always was a myth. It's just that more recently it has been exposed precisely as mythic, and virtually no one these days votes for that. The only way that you can enforce that, as sadly the likes of Colombia demonstrate on a kind of murderous daily basis, is through coercion. Through puppet states, which are themselves backed up by NATO, the US, the EU, and so on. But the sort of ideological credit, if you like, issued by global financial capitalism post that Soviet era, it's been maxed out. Nobody believes these myths anymore. And it's really, really important that people in the metropoles of the world get up to speed with this. Because as Francisco has touched upon, this need to kind of confront and isolate the likes of the US, the Europeans, the British, as the vote last week in the UN against the blockade of Cuba has shown, it's the rogue states like the US and indeed Israel, their only direct supporter in that vote. They are the ones who are isolated in world terms. It's just that largely because of their power, they create a kind of bubble in which it appears they are kind of the spokespeople of the world. They are the police officers of the world. As your entire event has indicated, the US imperialism is not the guarantor of freedom and democracy. It is the enemy, precisely the enemy of these things. Imperialism is tyranny, not democracy. And in relation to so-called American exceptionalism, that vote last week has shown us again that the only thing exceptional about the US is its hypocrisy. And those recent comments that Biden made about how no US politician would ever intervene in another country's internal affairs would be laugh out loud ridiculous were it not so murderously hypocritical. And you all know better than anyone, what US non-interventionism is. It's horrible, it's brutal. It will use, as we've heard from Matt, lawfare. It'll try to delegitimize elections, but where necessary, it will use force and violence. That applies, of course, to Nicaragua as well, which I think others will speak about in more detail shortly. But one of the worst things I think about the coup in Bolivia, and this is why we do need to be vigilant in terms of Venezuela, in terms of Nicaragua in particular, is that you could see the coup in Bolivia happening from a long way out. And that was not just the usual suspects and all the sort of CIA lies, but that self-declared progressives, eco-warriors, environmentalists were parroting verbatim CIA lies about Evo Morales and so on. And even though all they were doing was providing ideological cover for outright fascists, they thought that they were actually doing the planet and the Bolivian people a favor. So those levels of ignorance or compliance really need to be shaken up and broken apart, because they're still very active in terms of so-called progressives and their attitudes to the likes of Venezuela, to what's about to happen in Nicaragua, as well as their complete silence when it comes to what's happening every single day in Colombia and so on. I think ultimately what we need to do is to learn from the really shining example, both politically in terms of consciousness, but also fortitude, resilience, and organization already on display across the entire continent. And we build from there, and we build from the ground up. Again, in relation to Cuba, that blockade, and Francisco is right in relation to Venezuela to say that they aren't sanctions. The blockade of Cuba equally is not a set of sanctions, because there are no international laws granting legal sanction to those unilateral coercive measures. It is economic warfare. It's gone on for over 6 decades, and it violates not just the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but it also violates the UN Charter, to which all member states must sign up. So if you were to believe the State Department in the US in its own sort of terms, if it's genuinely committed to a rules-based international system, it will expel itself from the United Nations, because it has violated every single charter by which you become a member of that organization. What we need then ultimately to do is to have conversations that either will confront people where they need to be confronted, or indeed to divest people of their delusion that they are bearers of democracy and human rights and freedom. You cannot back imperialism and seriously be considered to be a defender of democracy and human rights and sovereignty and so on. So thank you so much for organizing this conference, which joins up the struggle and joins up all of these different situations in a really, really necessary way. So solidarity to all of you, and many thanks.
Thank you, Aaron, and solidarity to you as well, and for all the work that you guys have been doing. Really powerful statements you just made there, and I really love when you say that we build up from the ground up. And this is precisely what we're doing. We're trying to do our absolute best as an international collective, grassroots, completely without any funds, really from the bottom up, and really, really fighting against this interference, against the interruption of democracy in our nations, which results in bullets in our brothers and sisters for the gain of the natural resources, as we can see across the region of Latin America. We want no more of this, and this is why we need to continue raising our voices and joining in together in one voice across the world. Thank you so much, Aaron, and continue doing what you're doing, and we look forward to seeing you again. We're going to have questions and answers at the end of everyone's interventions. We now come back to Francisco, this time to talk about the situation in Nicaragua. Before the intervention, we're going to show you just about 3 minutes video clip. It's in Spanish. I'm not sure if Pedro will translate that, but I'm going to put it on just now, and then Francisco is on. Thank you. For the people that want to start want to either comments or questions, just please put them in the chat. Same for the people that are following us on Twitter, on YouTube, and Facebook. Please feel free to leave your comments, and our team will make sure that we make it known to our panel. Thank you. So I'm going to just share a video now.
Lista de fracciones políticas opositoras y organizaciones no gubernamentales que recibieron jugosos fondos de Estados Unidos para nutrir una infructuosa intentona golpista en Nicaragua ha quedado al descubierto.
No son 16 millones, es más dinero.
La máscara se les ha caído a los opositores nicaragüenses, y tras las revelaciones que hiciera una funcionaria de Estados Unidos sobre la triangulación de unos 16 millones de dólares, más filtraciones comienzan a circular. En junio de 2018, el mismo periodista norteamericano Max Blumenthal destapó los famosos fondos NetUSAID, cuyas millonarias cifras fueron otorgadas a 54 agrupaciones opositoras en Nicaragua a través de los tentáculos de la ahora dividida Alianza Cívica y el extinto Instituto de Estudios Estratégicos y Políticas Públicas, IEP.
Voy a los datos de la USAID y veo que son 13 millones de dólares solo el año pasado. Me pregunto, ¿qué se metió tanta plata?
Hoy ya no hacen falta los cables y filtraciones sobre este desaparecido botín millonario que recibió la oposición nicaragüense. La misma USAID en su página oficial se ha encargado de publicar organizaciones, cifras y hasta nombres de quienes recibieron las millonarias transferencias y checazos. Entre algunas organizaciones que desviaron al menos unos 30 millones de dólares figuran la FUNIDES, dirigida por Juan Sebastián Chamorro, IEP de Félix Maradiaga, el CENIT de Vilma Núñez, la Fundación Popolná de Mónica Baltodano, el Grupo 5 de Carlos Fernando Chamorro y Sofía Montenegro y el Movimiento por Nicaragua de Violeta Granera.
Los fondos que son cuestionados son los fondos de AID. Y aquí está, son 15 millones de dólares que se han desembolsado en 70 actividades desde el 2015 a la fecha. Entendemos que la Alianza Cívica sí recibió algunos fondos para los gastos logísticos del proceso de diálogo.
Al ventilarse la lista de la llamada cooperación externa de la USAID destinada a organismos opositores para supuestamente fortalecer el desarrollo y la democracia en Nicaragua, se han agudizado más las pugnas y tensiones internas entre estos pequeños grupos políticos, quienes hoy se desmoronan por sus intereses económicos y de poder.
That was quite an introduction, Francisco. Oh, my camera is not working. Yes, it is. Francisco, welcome back to talk to us about Nicaragua. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I should explain, we have some difficulties getting some speakers. So since I'm a member of the national executive of the Nicaragua Solidarity Campaign Action Group, we thought that we could speak with some propriety there. Now, this video clearly lays out what exactly the problem is and that Nicaragua faces. The problem is called the United States. The problem that Brazil faces may look like Bolsonaro, but in the final analysis, it is the United States. The problem Mexico faces, and so on. I think it's the Monroe Doctrine which is the problem. The United States does absolutely everything in its power, and it has power. I mean, it's a very powerful country. It's extraordinarily rich. It can disburse huge amounts of money all the time for a very, very long period of time to get its way. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. I'm a political activist. I'm able to organize things. I can get things done and, mobilize people for causes and so on. If I were to receive, say, $120 million, me and my mates, people I work with, would be able to organize massive and magic things literally every single week of the year. And the impact of that will be gigantic. This is exactly what they do. All the financing of every single NGO has the purpose of training people, which is the cadre that they're training. We're talking about not one, not 20, not hundreds, but thousands of them, which have been trained over the years in some countries, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, even more years, which, is the way they do it to create what are really political parties that do the dirty work of the empire in that domestic terrain. This is what they do. So imagine a country such as Nicaragua, which is 7 million people. Its GDP is about $40 billion a year. The United States can disburse more than that in less than 2 days without any problem. Finance, anything it wants. So you can imagine the ability that it has, not only to finance people and to train your thugs, but also to co-opt people into doing its dirty work. It's very tempting for many people who don't have a very strong moral spine to be persuaded to help the United States by being paid, by being given all sorts of perks, positions, what have you. So the capacity of patronage and cooptation of imperialism is gigantic. When none of that works, they go for war. As they did with Nicaragua between 1979, well, the war began later on, all the way to 1990, the Contra War. What is extraordinary to me in that experience of Nicaragua was, number one, that Nicaragua lasted too long, so long, 10 years, confronting the military machine of the most powerful country in the history of humanity, and sustain that for 10 years is close to miraculous. Eventually, they were defeated. But what they did do was they came to the following conclusion. We are not going to allow provocations to force us into military confrontations in the domestic terrain, because if we were to be provoked into that way, then our democracy, the one that has taken us so long to build, even though it's not perfect, will be destroyed. We are prepared to go back. We are prepared to retreat. We are prepared to make concessions in the nice sense of the word, and therefore to ensure that we avoid those confrontations, which would be very horrible, because it will, push society into a conflict that nobody could control, with unprecedented consequences, which would play right in the hands of the United States and the proxies that it has in the. And what is extraordinary, the FSLN was prepared to stay out of power for 16 years when it could have had the capacity to organize something dramatic, such as, going for, subverting the government. They didn't. They respected democracy because they knew that unless they did so, they would not be able to continue building what they began historically back in 1979. So in 2006, they recommenced, as it were, the process of the transformation of their society that they began back in 1979. This is extraordinary generosity, ethical position, but also discipline, which is exactly what you need, in order to deal, when you are very weak, as Nicaragua is, to deal with an enemy such as the United States. And when Ortega came back as the president and the FSLN came back as the government in 2006, the United States was not even interested, was worried, of course, was hostile, as you expect. But what was extraordinary was the level of performance of the FSLN in government from 2006. I mean, that economy grew at a rate of 4.2% per year on average, which, almost no country was growing at that rate. Poverty was more than halved. The country became self-sufficient in food by 90%. Which is extraordinary. This is a country of small farmers, basically, and small street sellers, very small, quite poor entrepreneurs. This is not a country of working class proletarian masses. This is not the case. For an organization such as the FSLN to be able to actually organize a social coalition that is able to perform those extraordinary feats, such as what they have done, reducing poverty, expanding education, expanding the rights of the people, and so on and so forth. It's extraordinary. And here is where I think another important point comes. The United States not only is hostile to this government, which they label communist, which they would do, as you would expect, but it's not only that it's a threat of a good example, they cannot allow them to succeed. Because if they were to succeed, the contagion that they represent, the attractiveness they represent to others is too great. And given that in Latin America, we have the pink wave for more than 10 years, where the Latin Americans were able to perform extraordinary developments, extraordinary field, extraordinary. So the United States now decided to go for a coup d'etat in 2018. I'm not going to tell you the story because I imagine everybody knows it. If you don't, get the information and read about it. The United States prepared this for more than 4 years in advance, pour huge amounts of money into it, prepared the case, prepared the conditions, prepared the media, not to name any guardians, of course, and then they went for it. And the result was horrible, absolutely disgusting. I mean, the number of killings and the manner of the killings was what horrified, not me, but everybody else. Not only me, but everybody else. They went around burning people publicly, deliberately, as a sample of horrifying and terrifying society. They went around burning houses of families with Sandinistas inside. Sandinistas family. They did it deliberately. They filmed it. Each one of them, they tortured people for hours on end, and they filmed this and they shared the filming all over the place. This was part and parcel of creating a culture of hatred, which was the only thing that the United States thought was going to polarize the situation sufficiently so that, hatred would dominate the situation, and then a civil war will start so that the United States was able to intervene militarily, which is more or less the same sort of concept. I'll finish in a second, Claudia. And now the United States actually, given that the coup d'etat in 2019 failed because of the discipline of the people and because of the leadership that was provided by the FSLN, then now the United States is going for sanctions, of course. What else? They don't know, they don't know anything else. So the first one was the NICA Act, which was instructing the United States representatives in any bilateral, multilateral institution not to allow the Nicaraguan government to actually, obtain any resources from the IMF, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and what have you. The idea was to try to start suffocating and asphyxiating the economy. And then now they are going for another one, which is called the Renacer Act, which is obviously sponsored by Narco Rubio. I didn't mispronounce that. Mr. Narco Rubio with Bob Menendez, who, are in cahoots. And this act has been already passed by the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Senate, but it hasn't been passed by the Senate. So there are possibilities to still stop it. And the crucial question, I'll finish literally with this, is that there are elections on the 7th of November. So the United States and their proxies in Nicaragua are up to no good to try to organize as many provocations as possible so that they can have justification in saying they do not recognize the coming elections. It's totally clear from the polls and from every other indication that the Sandinistas are going to win easily. The oppositions are deeply divided. They had more or less between 10 to 13 candidates, which is an indication of their weakness. And again, I must say, resistance pays off. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francisco. We are very, very honored in a way to have Francisco as part of our members of WIPALAS across the world as well, because the level of the knowledge that you have, Francisco, and the activism, the work that you've done at international level is really key for our region. Often we don't understand in depth these topics, the issues, the struggles that our brothers and sisters in the region are experiencing. I can say that from experience, from my own experience, when suddenly we had a coup in Bolivia and suddenly we see people being killed for our natural resources. So it's very important that we learn more, and that's why we made these spaces possible, and also in English, because it's very important for the audience to understand what's the impact in our region of this interference from Europe, Britain, and the United States. Thank you so much, Francisco. We're now next going to speak to Tim, who comes and speaks to us about Bolivia. Tim is part of Friends of Bolivia, an organization that I have been admiring personally for a long time. But during the coup, we had a great pleasure of working together, following their work, and then eventually working together. So it's very, very, very very important for us to join forces, team, and very welcome to WIPALAS across the world. The floor is yours. My screen has frozen, so I don't see anyone's faces. So this is interesting. This shows how grassroots we are. We don't have a technical team. We don't have a studio. This is literally just volunteers across the world joining forces to fight for the restoration of democracy and maintenance of democracy in our countries. So my screen froze, but team, you're somewhere, I'm sure. There you are. Team,
okay, you can hear me. Okay. If you can hear me okay, yeah, I'll continue. Grant, look, thanks very much indeed for the invitation to come and talk to you about the solidarity work of Friends of Bolivia. I was involved with Francisco and a number of other people in helping to set up Friends of Bolivia, specifically to carry out that campaign work of opposing the dismantling of Bolivian democracy and exposing the far right coup regime. So as a network of activists on Latin American struggles, we came together before the coup in solidarity with Evo and with Massa's campaign to win another electoral victory. Our roots are really, as Friends of Bolivia, in the British Labour movement and particular groupings such as the Labour Friends of Progressive Latin America, as well as links with left-wing media outlets such as Labour Outlook and Labour Hub and Morning Star, etc. So that was a particular aspect that we could bring to solidarity work with Bolivia. But we've also aimed to work with a range of Bolivian solidarity groups, obviously including WIPALAS across the world, to exchange information and insights and to help amplify each other's anti-imperialist voices. One of the earliest pieces of work that we carried out was in 2019, is that US-backed hostility that Aaron mentioned, a media misrepresentation setting the grounds for the coup against Morales was as it stepped up before the election, and we organised a solidarity statement with over 30 signatures from leading trade unionists and politicians and campaigners, academics, artists, to try and get a good sense of opposition and follow that, but with various articles placed in those sort of outlets that I've mentioned. But as soon as the coup took place, our activity had to be dramatically scaled up, and in response, we organised straight away a solidarity rally with VSC, Brazil Solidarity Initiative, Friends of Ecuador, Labour Friends of Progressive Latin America, building on that lead that Jeremy Corbyn had shown when he condemned the coup on November the 11th in statements and again in articles that we helped place elsewhere. So I think really that set a template for much of our solidarity work, challenging the two dominant mainstream media narratives that were around. First, that there had been electoral fraud, as alleged by the US-dominated Organization of American States, and second, that no coup had actually ever taken place. That very flimsy allegation of electoral fraud made by the Organization of American States was challenged, I think, most effectively by an analysis done by the Washington-based Center for Economic and Policy Research, and we used that to make it clear that the coup was, yet another example of US intervention in Bolivia's democratic life, and being able to trace that back to, what had happened before. Hopefully as well, many of you will have seen the planned tweet on our Twitter account, which provides a very brief but very penetrating analysis by Alex Main from the Center for Economic and Policy Research on the entire history of US destabilization of Bolivia in recent years, and how the far-right coup, was by no means, the US's first attempt to intervene in Brazil's, in Bolivia's democratic life, and stop it from pursuing, economic and social justice. So, you know, as things have gone on, clearly there have been other phases in our solidarity work, working with people, as indeed for the, you know, the work of other solidarity groups on Bolivia, as the coups moved through that that 11-month passage from when it started to when it was finally defeated with the, that historic election victory. So, like other solidarity groups, our work has been focused on countering disinformation and building support for Evo and the MAS. So, in the early days, we helped publicise the racist nature of the coup and the acts of repression that were being carried out, and the programme of austerity that the Áñez regime commenced. We also challenged the delays in holding the election as the regime tried to consolidate its position and hold on to power. Ahead of the 2020 election, we organised a letter in support of Bolivian democracy that was signed by MPs, Lords from the Labour Party, the Scottish Nationalist Party, Sinn Féin, as well as 9 trade union leaders and solidarity activists across the UK. And ran an online meeting supported by 12 other organisations. So it really was part of bringing together, as wider grouping of people to, to support the MAS in terms, and to support Bolivian people in their struggle against the regime. And then after the 2020 election, we've tried to explain what the Arce government is doing as it strives to undo that legacy of the coup regime and hold those responsible for the coup and the repression accountable and bring them to justice. And again, I think what's interesting is we've seen the mainstream media and organisations like Human Rights Watch denounce Áñez's arrest and try to use the OAS's debunked report about so-called electoral fraud as a reason for Evo being driven from office. And that, again, is needed challenging. In terms of, in sort of nuts and bolts, all these articles and briefings and meetings that we've organised are posted on our Friends of Bolivia website, but we've also tried to share them as widely as possible across those media that I mentioned and with other organisations. 2 of the key meetings that we've held were a rally in January this year, marking 3 months since MAS's historic victory, and a meeting in April 2021 entitled Solidarity with Bolivia, Hope and People Power. And Claudia spoke at that meeting, which we were really pleased to have you there, Claudia. And Miriam as well from Bartolina Caesar Resistance, as well as Jeremy Corbyn. So, a really good wide platform of people. So, in summary, we saw our role as working very much with the Labour movement and solidarity campaigns and groups, as well as, domestically based Bolivian solidarity groups, to provide information and help people, gear people up to spread understanding of what was really happening in Bolivia, challenge those mainstream media narratives, and offer solidarity to those who are actually fighting the coup regime on the ground, as I think Aaron mentioned. And, and perhaps above all, as Richard Burgeon said in an article in October last year, this has been an opportunity for us to learn the lessons from Bolivia as to how you stand up to and defeat racist right-wing forces. So I just end by saying that, if you could follow us on Friends of Bolivia as we continue to try and build solidarity with, with families across the world and other organisations, amplify those messages of Bolivians calling for justice for the victims of the coup regime, and celebrate the victory of people power against the far right regime. And hopefully what that will be is a continuing movement to build sort of international solidarity that ensures that, along with all those other those other countries that have been talked about tonight, that US-backed coups in Bolivia and elsewhere will no longer be something that are contemplated. Thanks.
That's right. Some grassroots technical issues. Thank you so much, team. That is really inspiring. As I was saying earlier, we in Suma Camaña, United Kingdom, our collective that supports el proceso de cambio, supports and fights for el proceso de cambio. We had started following your work, and we have been very impressed by the solid and proactive intervention you had, and shows solidarity and inspired us as well. So thank you, team, and how amazing that we're working now together, and how great to have you in our platform. And let's continue to do more of this, so we make sure that there is no other coup that takes place in Bolivia, and we join our international voices. Thank you so much, Tim. We're now going to go to, I was trying to put a video because it's so inspirational to hear what Tim said, and this solidarity that Bolivians and also brothers and sisters from other countries here in the UK and around the world, that we're going to try to put it at the end to show you a little bit as well of what we were able to mobilize as a grassroots organization, international organizations that we now, with Palas, has around perhaps 13 or 15 countries at times that join their voices in Europe, in Central America, in the United States, in Australia. And so it's a very impressive mobilization that we had to support, to make sure that we denounce the violations of human rights in Bolivia. We're now coming to the last part of our panel. It has been extremely informative and inspiring. We have a question for our panelists today. Anyone that wants to make anyone that wants to, if you want to ask a question to the panel, please put your questions in the chat. And we won't, unfortunately, we don't have time to open the mics for our guest here in today in the session, but we will be reading your questions or comments that you want to make. There is we already have a question that we have ready for our panel. I think some people also are leaving some comments, which I will read in a bit. The first question to all panelists, and perhaps we will start with perhaps Matt, and then however you want to take forward next of you, okay? So the question in English will be, and I'll say in English and Spanish, so our audience both bilingual can hear it. So what prospects are there of resuming regional integration interrupted by Yankee aggression? ¿Qué perspectivas hay de retomar la integración regional interrumpida por la agresión Yankee? So we'll start with you, Matt, and then whomever wants to answer next, please just put your name in the chat, and then I'll come to you or just raise your hand, okay? Matt.
Sure. Yeah, I think there are incredible prospects for the resumption of regional integration through, potentially new forms, but also UNASUR, a refoundation of UNASUR, the expansion of ALBA, and the portal, what's the word in English? The strengthening of those bonds as well. So beyond, perhaps simply just trade in Mercosur, but a much more deep integration of health systems, of political projects. I think it's no accident that in everywhere from in Pedro Castillo and Perú Libre, they emphasize a refoundation of UNASUR, express a desire to potentially join in with ALBA. But I think it's also really important that, especially in the in thinking about in the metropolitan context, that maximum pressure is put on the United States first and foremost to do things like end the blockade of Cuba and Venezuela. I mean, this is, I think, a critical barrier, but it's also a moment, especially in the Cuban case, where I think there may be maybe an opening. This is public opinion. We at Progressive International have been able to actually poll people in the United States, and overwhelming majorities supports an end to the blockade on Cuba, especially in this context of a global pandemic, and Cuba's ability to not only produce vaccines but also express, I think, some of the most inspiring internationalism we're seeing today, and their medical missions that they've been doing for so long, but now is right in the forefront of the world's eye. So I think there's both a desire and a real movement in Latin America, and of course, it remains to be seen if there can be electoral victories in really critical contexts like Colombia, the beachhead of U.S. imperialism, where I am now, and Brazil. I mean, most importantly, the largest economic power in the region. This is going to be critical. So I mean, it's impossible to say, but the prospects are very bright, in my opinion.
Thank you, Matt. That's really hopeful to hear as well, and I guess that's also the feeling and why we are here together. We're going to hear from Aaron next. Aaron, and there is a very interesting question that I would like also the panel to respond in a bit, which says, in a bit later, should the progressive governments in Latin America withdraw completely from the OAS? I think we love that question and we love the answer already.
I mean, I could touch on that to begin with, if you like, just because I think that anyone naive enough to think that the OAS is some sort of neutral, consensual arbiter of anything is historically and politically illiterate. I mean, like anything, follow the money for a start, and then secondly, why was it founded, how was it founded, and so on. I think for everyone else, as well as in terms of your continent and that real need, via Simón Bolívar, José Martí, all the way through to the 20th century and this century, it's so important, particularly when you're confronting the biggest empire in the history of this entire planet. And the internationalism is already there. It's something that the US can't blockade Cuban internationalism. Even though Cubans can't get basic things in their own society, they will send their people around the world to help others. And no matter all the dollars, all the gold, all the new technology and weapons can't kill that example. And the task is to make that concrete, as Cuba, of course, does, against the grain of all of that imperial aggression. And for the rest of us, it's important to defend Cuba to the hilt, to defend ground already taken, whether it's Bolivia, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and indeed to do our utmost then for everyone else on the receiving end of the state violence in Colombia, the fascist puppet in Brazil. Because again, one other thing that the empires can't really deal with these days is mass mobilization. If you get the numbers together, as people heroically showed, despite being butchered in their own streets in Bolivia, they did it. And the places like Venezuela were already far ahead in terms of the civic military alliance. You need to prepare for the aggression from the empire. A lot of Bolivians had to do that on sort of ad hoc basis, and the exemplary courage and strength shown is just awe-inspiring and world-leading. And it's just taking that energy and formulating something that's ALBA plus, or that integrates things. Again, all those coercive sanctions from the US will do everything they can to disrupt this. But despite all the economic disruption, the political, ideological disruption, the media misinformation, and so on, the vast majority of people are on the side of mobilizing and getting together. If anything else, the United States will fail in its mission to dominate the entire planet, and it'll either fail because there's no planet left to dominate. You can't. The US model is unsustainable on a planetary scale. So either there'll be nobody left as masters or exploited, or the more affirmative alternative is that we will have got together and we'll have done something about this. And just to reiterate something I said earlier, despite the sort of the media amplification, the economic power and the political power, it's the US that's actually isolated. It's just its power masks this, really. And in addition to the vote that they got, as they've got recently from Israel, supporting their crimes against Cuba, there were, of course, those 3 abstentions as well. And what's notable about Ukraine, Brazil, and indeed Colombia is the disparity between those US-backed states and regimes and the experience of their peoples, because in each of those cases, and they're not alone in the world in terms of this, all of them have been on the receiving end of Cuban humanitarianism. those in the wake of Chernobyl who were treated freely by the Cubans and so on. Colombia, the peace process, betrayed, of course, by the state and by the US, facilitated by Cuba. And of course, Brazil, a place where Cubans sent doctors that the Brazilian state wasn't going to send them and so on. So the historic experience of the people of those countries know full well who's on the right side of history and who's on the wrong side of history. And I really hope that internationally we join things up, and there's a lot to be done, but you are the example. And I hope that that makes itself concrete sooner rather than later as well, sort of institutionally and politically and so on. So solidarity to you. Adelante.
Thank you so much, Aaron. That was very powerful indeed. We're going to go next with Francisco, and after Francisco, I believe, Tim, and then we're going to switch to Spanish as well, so then we can hear from our comrade Marta. Because we're also coming to the end, maybe you can answer both questions as you just done, Aaron. It's up to you, but just a suggestion. Thank you. Francisco.
Yeah. The first thing I want to do is to ask permission to put a link in the chat, which is the Nicaraguans, the Alliance for Global Justice, are asking organizations around the world to sign this letter demanding that the United States stops interfering in their internal affairs, particularly towards the election on November 7th. So if that's okay, I'll put it in here, and it's up to organizations whether they sign it or not. So that's number one. Number two, on the 5th of July, the Venezuela Solidarity campaign is organizing a special webinar with João Pedro Stedile, which is the leader of the landless movement in Brazil, with Carlos Ron, who is the president of the Simón Bolívar Institute of Solidarity, and then with Maria Rodriguez, a representative of the club, which is a food distribution system in Venezuela. And the title is, US sanctions deny Venezuelans the right to have food. Another crime against humanity. That's more or less the title. So you can see the rest of it, from there. Obviously, in this occasion, there will be a discussion on the case of Alexa Ab, who is being retained illegally in Cape Verde because he was facilitating contracts between Venezuela and third countries. The United States is imprisoning him because he's doing something on countries that got nothing to do with the United States. Regarding the specific question, I think it's urgent. And I think it's urgent, even if we don't have it perfectly organized as we used to have it, not perfectly, but better organized than we used to have it during the pink time. I think it's urgent that we start to liaising together. They're already doing it, by the way. And this time round, there is a difference. And the difference is called Mexico. In the previous pink time, Mexico was not there. Mexico now is part of it. Obviously, Mexico cannot disentangle itself from the United States that quickly, with which it was that easy, but it isn't. The tragedy of Mexico is to be so far from God and so close to the United States, as they themselves keep telling you every single time. And the level of economic interaction between the two, between the United States and Mexico, is hugely intense. 85% of exports of Mexico go to the United States, and 85% of imports to Mexico come from the United States. That gives you an idea of how difficult it is for Mexico just to come out. Nevertheless, Mexico is reorienting itself towards the south and towards the east. It's totally clear that it's already signed several agreements with Argentina. It's already signed several agreements with Luis Arce in Bolivia, and it's already been extremely active in the region, setting up the Puebla group and taking all sorts of initiatives involving presidents and institutions and politicians and so on, including Lula and Dilma Rousseff and so forth. So it is becoming a quite powerful force. And the reason why this is urgent is because it is a practical task. Even though I agree with all the arguments that, economically we can collaborate, we need to collaborate, the pandemic actually makes it even more necessary that we do so. But the real problem for me is political. If we are on our own, they can easily pick on each one of them one by one and destroy us. If we are together, it's fantastically more difficult. And that must be the only reason. That must be the absolutely supreme reason why we want to be together and we want to coordinate everything. And the reason why the collaboration and the economic regional integration is important is because the stake involves everybody. So everybody has a stake in the regional integration as he used to do. For example, let me give an example where I think some progressive governments committed a mistake, and I say this very humbly. For example, when Telesur was launched, the Brazilian government refused to participate as part of it, which is obviously a big mistake. And nobody needed more media than Brazil, in 2016 and all the rest since then. So that gives an idea that lessons can be learned, and it's quite important to do this. And you can imagine, Argentina is an agricultural power. Brazil is an industrial power. Venezuela is an energy power. Bolivia is a mineral and energy power. And then, we have Cuba, which is a medical power, biotechnological power. If you put all of that together, my God, we can do anything. And finally, just a small, perhaps petty point that I cannot resist. And it is this. There are people around the place, particularly in Europe, that are telling us what to do. And I don't think they're the main problem, thankfully. There is very minor nuisance, if at all. I want to say two things. Number one, we make the revolutions, they don't. And they tell us how to do it. So it is quite important that we understand that. And we are going to make our revolutions in the way we make them. We are imperfect. We have leadership which are imperfect, we make mistakes. To actually carry out the transformation of society is difficult, it's not easy, it takes time. You have to thread new terrain, things you didn't know, and nothing is written in manuals. If it was, it would be easy, but it isn't. So therefore, what we should do is to have a constructive relationship with everybody, where we all learn from each other. And we are, I think, we in Latin America, not we here in the UK, are in the best position to perhaps learn from, rather than teach people what to do. So the sooner we start the regional integration, the better it is. And the more we do it, the more that it becomes a pole of attraction. And the easier it is to attract more governments and more forces towards it. We don't have to have the government as part of the regional integration. Chavez showed that what you can have is a mayor in a city. You can have, cities. You can have political parties. You can have social movements that are part of the regional integration without necessarily waiting to win the government. So these can start right away. And I think we're a bit slow. We need to do it urgently because the United States is declining very badly and it's rather desperate.
I think an applause is what needs to follow for after Francisco has just said. Thanks, Francisco. And it is the work that all of you guys are doing that really contributes to that integration. And let's just do more of that. Thanks, Francisco. Thank you very much. And I'm sure that we will meet, hopefully not for bad news, but to count on our victories as trade unionists, as grassroots, as civil society, to tell how we have managed to keep our sovereignty in all our nations. Thank you so much, Francisco. Perhaps a bit too optimistic there, but it is possible. I've been left very, very inspired by what Francisco has just told us. We are going to now move on to Tim, and then we're going to hear from Marta. Someone has sent a question about asking us, where is Friends of Colombia? And I'm just explaining that we have Colombia Humana here present, and she will speak to us, and Marta will speak next after Tim. And this is where we're gonna switch to Spanish, and whoever speaks English will hear the translation in English. I'm just giving a fair warning to our wonderful Pedro, who's translating away all the way from Cochabamba in Bolivia, where apparently it's very cold today. But nothing like, of course, Britain or Europe cold. Right, so next is Tim. This is pretty much the end of our questions. We have just about 10 minutes left of our panel today. Tim, we'd like to hear from you. The floor is yours. Thank you. Oh, your microphone is off, I think, Tim.
Okay, I won't say very much because we've still got people to hear, but I mean, in terms of regional integration, I mean, I think clearly this, it's been referred to UNISUR and ALBA. I think, ALBA has been a tremendously important development in terms of the way, what it's been able to deliver on the ground and emphasize to people the importance of how, of regional integration and what it can actually deliver. So that actual concrete demonstration of the benefits of regional integration has been, has been tremendous over the last few years. In terms of withdrawing from the OAS, well, there are some, Venezuela and Cuba obviously are not in OAS already. Yes, it's attractive. I just think it needs to have something very concrete in mind as to what everyone's going to join and become a new fulcrum of opposition to the US in order for that to work, rather than just simply piecemeal withdrawing from it without any real alternative, because that will still leave the OAS in a dominant position. That's all.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you. I think Pedro needs some fair warning, and also Marta. I don't know if Marta, Marta, no sé si nos escucha. Ahora vamos a pasar a hablar en español. No sé si Marta está ahí. Vamos a chequear. In the meantime, I'm just going to share a very quick video, which I planned to show a little earlier. It was part of the program, but something didn't work, but now it does. So I'm just going to share a little bit of what it was for Wipalas across the world, some of the work that we did during the coup d'etat. We tried to compile everything in one video, and then it became the mega video, almost documentary. So we only left a small 2-minute video of what we have done. So let me just share this with you now. One second, please. Marta, ¿nos escucha? I don't think Marta can hear us. And I cannot share my video either. There is something wrong with this. That's okay. We're going to now, I think we were going to end questions with Marta. I don't know if Marta can hear us, but we could perhaps use this space at the end when we're finishing the panel, then we'll be able to put the video that we wanted to show you. In the meantime, if anyone would like to have perhaps one closing message, please feel free. And then we're going to close with our usual collective hayaya, where we open everyone's mics and then we say our final message as a collective. Will anyone like to say one final message for this?
Go.
Yes, Francisco, we hear you.
I'm sorry to be so imposing.
Go for it, Francisco. That's what won us democracy. Go, we hear you.
There is a substantial qualitative difference between the defeats that we've suffered recently compared to the defeat we suffered in the 1970s and 80s. And the reason is structural. In the 70s and 80s, they crushed us physically with everything we had built over decades, such as our political parties, our trade unions, social organizations, democracy, elections, and what have you. They install brutal dictatorships such as Pinochet. And it takes time to recover from that. In the case of Chile, it took us 17 years. We're still recovering from it. We're still working on restoring democracy. We're inching towards it, after 50 years. The difference between that and these defeats is that we have been able to preserve the key organizations and the social memory of the movement. And that's why we were able to actually come back, as it were, so quickly in so many places. Mexico is an exception, perhaps, but certainly, Bolivia showed that extraordinary development, the survival of Nicaragua, the survival of Venezuela, the expansion of the left in the region is extraordinary. So I think, given that that is the case, next down ought to be Bolsonaro. Once we have Brazil on our side, there is going to be a piece of cake. So there is everything to gain for. And that's why the more we organize solidarity, which does make a difference, the better it is, the easier it is for them. So long live Latin America. Resistance is the name of the game. We shall prevail. Thank you.
Hayaya. And that's it. We are going to end on that fantastic inspirational note. In fact, this Saturday, we do have a Fora Bolsonaro demonstration, which is very important as well for everyone that's watching to attend if you're in London. Elections are next year. We do believe Lula will return. We have firm confidence and trust, and now that everything that was all this fake news and lawfare that was put against him now is proven to have been, I tried to find kind words, but it was found to be not true, as it happened in Bolivia, as it had happened in other countries in the region, Latin American region. We're coming to an end. I'm opening all the mics. Thank you everyone for being here today. I believe you can open your mics and you can say our collective Hayaya. Thank you so much. This is the penultimate event of the 14 Days of Resistance. Our next event is on Saturday, where we bring the coup d'etat documentary to Europe and subtitled in English. We will be broadcasting in platforms with Progressive International. So we are joining forces on that. And we really look forward to seeing you there and having the opportunity as well to speak to the director, Maria Fernanda Rada. It's been an absolute pleasure, very informative. Let's keep doing more of this, and Hayaya Bolivia.
Hayaya.
Hayaya.
Hayaya. And a massive applause to Pedro. Pedro, bravo. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.